It is time now for our Talkback segment. Each day we post a question on CourtTV's social media pages. We gather your comments and questions and respond right here on the show. Now today we saw a familiar face on the stand in the case against disbarred attorney Alec Murdaugh. His former best friend testified before the judge previously, but today the jury got to hear from Chris Wilson.
You believe the defendant when he told you these things?
Yes, sir. I didn't have any reason not to.
Your best friend?
Yes, sir.
Did you trust him?
I did. She didn't notify me about that actually until all this blew up, and I turned all that over to SLED after we found it, after all this blew up in September.
So for today's question, we asked you, what did you think of Chris Wilson's testimony? Still with me, former federal prosecutor Joe Brewer and criminal defense attorney David Bruno. Gentlemen, our first comment comes from Marjorie. Marjorie says the defense is trying to prove that Alec Murdaugh was such a wonderful family man. All this tells me is that Chris Wilson was a very close friend, and that didn't stop Alec Murdaugh from stealing from him. Relationships meant nothing to this narcissist, Alec Murdaugh. And Dave, that sounds a lot like the character evidence we're talking about. You know, at the end of the day, I thought Chris Wilson was a good witness, but I want to ask you more about the defense's tactic of using a lot of these witnesses to really bring out the fact that this guy was a family man and that there were no issues in the family. They've even used that tape of the few minutes before the shootings, allegedly, where he's kind of happy with his family. This is not a guy who's angry at anybody that now would turn around and shoot them. What do you make of that effort by the defense?
Sure, I think that would be a good effort, but for the horrible financial crimes and the bad character evidence that we're seeing, I mean, it really does cut against that. Although the defense could work around it, basically saying that this guy had an addiction and look at the relationships that he had and why would he want to kill his wife and son. So it could go both ways, Michael.
All right, our next comment comes from Deanna. Deanna says if Alex gets convicted, it will be overturned on appeal. The prosecution and judge gave the defense their #1 guaranteed grounds for the appeal. The prosecution knew the financial crimes would sway the jury. They knew they had a weak case for murders without the other crimes. That's a fair assessment. I mean, I'm not so sure in terms of their case. I think it's not the strongest case in the world, but I think they have a decent case, although the forensics certainly aren't there. Joe?
I don't think at this point, I don't think that that's going to be a basis for a successful appeal. The standard review on that kind of evidentiary ruling is afforded a lot of discretion. And as we talked about earlier, I think Judge Newman has not only done what I would just say a reasonable and justifiable job in navigating the admissibility of that financial crimes evidence, but I think he's been very clear and very complete and accurate in the basis for his ruling, and I think that's going to withstand subsequent review.
I agree up to this point. If he allows in that roadside shooting situation with Cousin Eddie, I think then you might be going over the line. But I don't think he's going to let that in. I've been on the record saying that. All right, Joe.